He never spoke much, not since that day he lost his canine partner in the line of duty. But when he found a German shepherd, beaten and tied up behind the police station like forgotten trash, something inside him cracked. No badge could protect against what came next. A crooked criminal in a small town, a silent bond between man and dog, and a brutal kick that ignited a storm. What happened next? It made the whole country stop scrolling and listen. Before we begin, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't, and tap that notification bell so you don't miss the stories that remind us of what courage really looks like. The sun had barely risen over the frostbitten edges of Clay Ridge, a small mountain town nestled in the shadow of the Bitterroot Range. It was early March, and winter still clung to the roads like a ghost that refused to leave. Icy mist rolled down from the peaks, hanging low over the two-lane road that wound like a silver ribbon through endless pine. Snow, half melted, had turned to slush and coated the gravel shoulders in grime. A storm was forecasted by nightfall, but for now, the air was quiet, cold, gray, and waiting. Noah Kane, 32, leaned slightly forward over the steering wheel of his black patrol SUV, headlights cutting a tunnel through the fog. His navy jacket was half unzipped, revealing the gray t-shirt beneath, dampened at the collar with sweat and snowmelt. His dark blonde hair, kept in a military-style taper, framed a face carved by 5 years in law enforcement and another 4 in the Marine Corps. There was a stillness to him, like someone who had seen too much to speak often. Since losing his canine partner Rex in a bust gone sideways last year, Noah had withdrawn. He did his job, kept his reports tidy, and spoke only when he had to. Even his fellow officers noticed it. Noah Kane, the man who had once made everyone laugh at the range, now walked like his boots were filled with memory. As he crested a bend near Miller's Pass, a glint caught his eye. Parked awkwardly on the shoulder was an old red Ford F-250, rust spreading like moss across its side panels. The driver's door was open, swinging slightly in the wind. Noah slowed, instincts tightening. The truck was empty, at least at first glance. He stepped out, his boots crunching over a mixture of ice and gravel. The air bit at his cheeks. "Hello?" he called out. Silence answered. Noah walked around to the back of the truck bed. What he saw made his stomach turn. Lying curled in the corner of the bed was a German shepherd, no older than 6, its body pressed against the cold steel wall. Blood, dried and dark, matted its fur, especially along the haunches and ribs. But worse were the rear legs, both bound tightly with twisted wire, cutting into the flesh. The metal had rusted, and the dog's breathing was shallow, each rise of the chest coming with a faint, wet wheeze. The dog didn't growl. It didn't bark. It only looked at Noah with eyes that had already decided whether to trust or die. Noah didn't hesitate. "You're not staying here." He gently climbed onto the tailgate and spoke low, soft. As he reached to touch the wire, the dog flinched, but didn't bite. It let him work. Blood welled as the last loop was unwrapped. But still, not a sound from the creature. Only when Noah wrapped the dog in his coat and lifted him down did he feel the full weight. Almost 80 pounds of trembling, cold, resigned life. He opened the back hatch of his SUV, laid down a spare thermal blanket, and placed the dog gently on top. The shepherd let out one long exhale and closed its eyes. Only then did Noah feel the tremble in his own hands. There were no tags, no collar, no microchip when he scanned him later at the vet. No one had reported a missing dog in days. To the world, this was just another stray. But to Noah, something about the dog's silence rang too familiar. Across town, in the warm glow of the Pines Country Club, a different kind of silence brewed. At the back of the members-only lounge, a fire cracked quietly in a stone hearth. Sitting in an armchair was Troy Maddox, 44, all charm on the outside and venom underneath, with salt and pepper hair slicked back and dressed in a pressed cream shirt and leather blazer. Troy looked every bit the successful businessman he pretended to be, owner of Maddox Timber Company, sponsor of youth sports, and donor to the sheriff's re-election campaign. But everyone in Clayridge who knew, really knew, understood that Troy Maddox ran more than lumber. Meth, pills, and bodies moved through the forest under his orders. Across from him sat Sheriff Carl Hewitt, mid-50s, stocky, with a bald head and permanent squint like he never trusted the sun. He took a sip from his whiskey, leaned in. "You said there's a problem?" Hewitt asked. Troy flicked ash from his cigar. "There's been chatter. A dog, big one, German Shepherd. Someone saw it sniffing around the old lumber yard. Same place I told you was off limits." Hewitt scoffed. "A dog?" "Not just any mutt," Troy replied, his tone growing thin. "It's got eyes like it remembers things. I don't need another set of those sniffing where they don't belong." Sheriff Hewitt set his glass down. "You want me to handle it?" "I want it gone, and while you're at it, tell your boy Kane to stay out of my dust. He's poking around too much since that K9 of his bit the dust. Don't let his grief turn into curiosity." There was a pause. The fire popped. "Message received," Hewitt said. Back at Noah's cabin on the outskirts of Clayridge, the fire in the wood stove hissed quietly. Noah knelt beside the dog, now bandaged, sedated, and resting on a makeshift bed of old quilts. The vet had cleaned the wounds, stitched the worst, and given antibiotics, but the prognosis was cautious. Noah brushed his hand through the dog's fur. A few patches were missing, scars layered over like battle maps. "You've seen hell," Noah whispered. "Me too." He sat back, staring into the flickering orange glow of the stove. His hand absent-mindedly rested on the dog's ribs, feeling the slow rhythm of breath. Somewhere outside, wind howled through the pines. And inside, in the quiet house, for the first time in months, Noah didn't feel alone. By mid-morning, the storm had softened into a fine mist that clung to the pine needles like cobwebs. The mountains surrounding Clayridge stood solemn, their peaks hidden in veils of pale cloud. It was the kind of cold that didn't bite. It seeped. Noah Kane stood at his kitchen sink, sleeves rolled to the elbow, rinsing dried blood from a set of gauze scissors. The German Shepherd lay behind him on the living room rug, wrapped in flannel and silence. The dog hadn't barked, hadn't whimpered, hadn't made a sound since being pulled from the back of that truck. But it had watched. Noah had seen that kind of silence before. In soldiers back from hell, in children who'd seen fire through the windows of their homes. There was intelligence in the shepherd's eyes, but more than that, there was restraint. It never snarled or bared teeth, but every muscle, every breath it took, seemed wired for assessment, as if it had learned the hard way that reacting too fast could get you killed. Noah dried his hands and turned toward the animal. "You were trained, weren't you?" He knelt beside the dog and gently lifted its front leg. Under the fur, just below the shoulder, a small injection scar remained faint but visible. He ran his fingers down the dog's abdomen, noting a tight cluster of surgical scars. Precision work, the kind done under controlled conditions, not the jagged mess of street fights or accidents. He narrowed his eyes, walked to his desk and powered on the department laptop. The screen flickered to life, casting a bluish glow across the otherwise dim cabin. He accessed the State K9 Retirement Registry, a rarely touched database holding files of every dog honorably discharged, medically retired, or listed as MIA. He entered every detail he could. German Shepherd, male, approximately 6 years old. Surgical scars along lower abdomen, implant scar below left scapula. 0 results. Noah leaned back. "You're off the books." He turned slowly to look at the dog, now alert, head slightly raised, watching. "What the hell were you part of?" Outside, tires crunched over ice. Noah tensed, hand moving instinctively to the Glock holstered at his hip. He peered through the front window and saw a utility truck across the street, one worker checking a power pole. The dog, still weak, suddenly rose, front legs trembling, and staggered towards the door. Not barking, not growling, but standing rigid, eyes fixed on the man outside. The worker wore a white dress shirt under his reflective vest. Noah's jaw tightened. He stepped towards the dog and placed a calming hand on its back. The tension didn't break, but the shepherd didn't move forward either. It simply stood, poised, like it knew, like it remembered. Downtown Clayridge, about a mile from the cabin, a faded brick building sat wedged between an abandoned bakery and a dollar store. Its windows were smeared from years of neglect, and the wooden sign overhead still read "The Clayridge Echo," though the paint had peeled to a whisper. Inside, Marie Halden typed with sharp focus, her fingers moving fast across the keyboard of a second-hand MacBook. The light from the single desk lamp reflected off her glasses, half hiding the fire in her eyes. 33, tall and broad-shouldered, with loosely curled brown hair, always shoved into a half-tied knot, Marie carried herself like someone who didn't expect the world to hand her anything. Her voice was low and dry, her words often too blunt for comfort, but she cared deeply, for justice, for forgotten truths, for stories that others were too afraid to chase. 10 years ago, she'd left Clayridge with the intention of never returning, but rumors had brought her back. Rumors of girls gone missing, of new money flooding a town with no growth, of Troy Maddox shaking hands with the mayor under one arm and hiding bodies under the other. Marie scanned the headline she'd written the night before. "Power and Timber, Who's Benefiting from Clayridge's Quiet Collapse?" It wouldn't run in the papers. Not yet. She wasn't stupid. She knew how Clayridge worked, who paid for silence, and who enforced it. She minimized the draft and pulled up the photo that had arrived in her inbox that morning. No subject line, no sender. The image was grainy, likely a phone shot taken under poor lighting. But in the center was a man she recognized, Noah Kane, the once reclusive Marine turned local officer, carrying a bloodied German Shepherd through the door of the town vet's clinic. Marie's fingers stilled. She hadn't heard his name in years, not since high school, where he'd been quiet but loyal, the kind of kid who never spoke unless it mattered. She remembered him returning from the Marines with a haunted look that hadn't gone away. People in town said he was dependable, that he kept to himself after the canine partner he worked with died in a botched raid last year. But now he was carrying a dog again? Her reporter instincts flared. She pulled open another window and began cross-referencing veterinary records. The dog wasn't listed under Noah's name, and the town vet hadn't posted anything on her social media. Odd, given the usual updates of kittens and corgi checkups. She began digging deeper. Noah returned from the precinct shortly after lunch. The shepherd was still lying near the fireplace, but as soon as Noah opened the door, it rose to its feet and moved, slowly but intentionally, to stand between him and the door. A sentinel posture, not aggressive, protective. "Okay," Noah said softly. "I get it. You're not just any stray." He removed his boots and jacket, walked over, and crouched beside the dog. "You recognize patterns. Respond to authority. You move like you've been trained for rooms, not fields." The dog leaned slightly into his hand, closing its eyes. "You're not nameless," Noah said, more to himself than to the dog. "Someone erased you, scrubbed you clean." Elsewhere, on the edge of town, at a luxury timber estate shielded behind iron gates and surveillance towers, Troy Maddox watched surveillance footage in a private lounge lined with mahogany and antlers. The video, captured by a dash cam of one of his trucks, showed a brief glimpse. Noah Kane's SUV pulled over, a dog cradled in his arms. Troy, mid-40s, lean and smooth-talking, with gray streaks in his otherwise dark hair, studied the screen. His suits were custom, his smile rehearsed, but behind the calm exterior lay a man who could burn a body in a sawmill and still make the Chamber of Commerce laugh at his jokes. He paused the video, zoomed in. The shepherd's face came into view. "Well," he muttered, pouring a measure of bourbon, "look who finally came home." He picked up his phone and dialed. "Tell Hewitt we've got a problem. That dog's not supposed to be alive." The snow had stopped by late afternoon, replaced by crisp, dry air and a winter sun that painted the mountaintops gold. In the heart of Clay Ridge, lanterns swayed gently along Main Street as the townspeople gathered for the annual Festival of Winter Lights, a decades-old tradition meant to ward off the lingering gray of February. Colorful banners flapped above the booths, the smell of fried dough and mulled cider drifting through the crowd. Laughter echoed off the brick buildings, families bundled in coats and scarves, their faces glowing with joy, if only for a night. Noah Kane stood near the outer edge of the square wearing a dark wool coat, his breath visible in the cold. He hadn't planned to come. Not really. But after everything, after the wounds, the silence, the strange scars, the dog needed fresh air. And perhaps so did he. The German shepherd, still unnamed publicly, walked carefully beside him, wrapped in a snug fleece vest. The bruising on his ribs hadn't fully healed, but the dog moved with calm precision. His eyes scanned every face, every shadow, like he was still on duty. People noticed. A few smiled, some kids pointed. "Is that a police dog?" one whispered. Noah didn't answer. He kept walking. Near the center of the square, a makeshift stage had been erected, strung with lights and pine garland. On it stood Troy Maddox, all charisma and calculated presence. His suit was ivory white, clean as snow, with a long black wool coat that flared when he moved. His salt and pepper hair had been slicked back, and a golden pin shaped like a pine tree sparkled on his lapel. To the townspeople, he was the picture of generosity, a business magnate who had saved the Clay Ridge economy, a donor to every school fundraiser and food drive. But behind the smiles, there was rot. Troy raised a hand as the mic squealed to life. "My friends," he said with warmth that never touched his eyes, "thank you for showing up tonight to keep this old tradition alive. When we light the final lanterns and set off those fireworks, remember, this isn't just about light. It's about hope and community." Polite applause followed. Marie Halden stood at the far edge of the crowd, holding her camera low but ready. She wore a long charcoal coat and wool hat, face flushed from the cold. The journalist's gaze swept the stage, then fell to the crowd, and paused when it landed on Noah. Her brow furrowed. Noah? Here? And then she saw the dog. She stepped back into shadow, lifting the camera without looking through the viewfinder, and began recording. Troy, meanwhile, had stepped down from the stage. He walked the rows of people, shaking hands, hugging grandmothers, making short jokes with kids. A king making his rounds. Then he saw the dog. Noah had moved to a quieter edge of the square near a booth selling caramel apples. The shepherd stood close to his side, ears half lowered, tail down, but eyes focused. It had locked onto Troy the moment the man approached. Troy's smile sharpened. He veered slightly, excused himself from a conversation, and strode toward them. Noah's back stiffened. "Well, well," Troy said, hands open like a preacher. "Officer Kane, glad to see you're finally joining the festivities." Noah didn't answer. His eyes flicked toward Troy's coat, then downward, to the shined leather shoes. He noticed the crisp white of the suit again. The shepherd stepped forward, not growling, not moving aggressively, just placing himself between Noah and the approaching man. Troy looked down. "That your mutt?" he asked. His tone didn't match the public smile. Noah's jaw clenched. "Rescue," Troy chuckled. "Is that what we're calling them now?" Then, without warning, he stepped in and kicked the dog, hard, straight into the ribs. There was a gasp from the surrounding crowd, followed by silence so sudden it might have been physical. The dog yelped and crumpled sideways. Noah dropped to his knees instantly, catching the shepherd before he hit the ground fully. Rage boiled. He surged to his feet, grabbing Troy by the collar and slamming him back a step. "You piece of—" "Back down," came a voice from behind. Sheriff Carl Hewitt, tall, stocky, late 50s with a walrus mustache and winter-blasted cheeks, stormed forward. His gloved hand clamped down on Noah's shoulder and yanked him backward. "Let go of him, Kane!" "He just assaulted," Noah started, but Carl shoved him hard. "I saw a man defend himself against a vicious animal," Hewitt barked. "Control your mutt or I'll put it down myself." Troy adjusted his coat, unfazed, brushing imaginary dust off his chest. "Cho Do Ben," he muttered under his breath. Vietnamese, oddly enough. Noah caught it. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Troy leaned close. "Next time, don't bring garbage into my square." Noah knelt beside the dog again, inspecting him. The shepherd's breathing was sharp, but not shallow. The pain was real, but not fatal. Still, he trembled. Marie had captured the entire moment. She lowered her camera, hands cold but steady. She looked at the little screen, played it back once. The sound of the kick, the yelp, the silence that followed, the crowd, Troy's face. She didn't speak. She didn't gasp. She just stared and whispered to herself, "This isn't just cruelty. It's a threat." Snow fell quietly the morning after the festival, blanketing Clay Ridge in a deceptive calm. The town moved a little slower, as if the cold itself had seeped into the bones of its buildings. From the outside, everything looked normal. Families scraping ice off windshields, kids throwing snowballs in alleyways, dogs barking at mail trucks. But inside the Clay Ridge Police Department, the air was thick with something far heavier than snow. Noah Kane sat in the chief's office, his fists clenched in his lap, the bruises on his knuckles still raw. He hadn't slept. Not really. Not since the kick. Not since that moment when everything, his restraint, his silence, shattered. Across the desk sat Chief Wallace Mays, a man in his early 60s with steel-gray hair and a paunch barely concealed beneath his uniform. He'd served Clay Ridge for 38 years, and though his badge still gleamed, his eyes had lost their fire years ago. Mays looked tired, like a man constantly choosing between what was right and what was safe. "I've got no choice, Noah," he said, voice low. "You laid hands on a civilian, in public, in front of half the damn town." "That civilian assaulted a dog," Noah shot back. Mays held up a hand. "I don't disagree with you, but you know how this works. Maddox is protected. And now I've got the sheriff breathing down my neck and a phone full of calls from council members who were there." There was silence. Noah stared at the plaque on the wall behind Mays. "Serve with integrity." The irony made his jaw ache. "You're suspended," Mays finally said, sighing. "Pending review, 2 weeks minimum. Turn in your weapon and badge by end of day." Noah stood slowly, his mouth tight. "You're protecting the man who kicked an injured animal in front of children." "I'm protecting this department from a storm we're not ready to fight." Noah said nothing. He turned and walked out without a salute. The town vet's clinic sat just off Birch Road, a cozy, aging building with peeling blue trim and a wooden dog sculpture nailed above the door. Inside, the warmth was immediate, the air thick with antiseptic and the soft scratch of claws on tile. Behind the front desk stood Dr. Eva Merrill, a woman in her late 40s with auburn hair pulled into a bun, thin wire glasses, and a no-nonsense presence. She was tall, thin, and always moved with purpose. After a decade working trauma triage for military dogs, Eva had settled in Clay Ridge for a slower life, only to find herself patching up cases that looked like war wounds. She glanced up as Noah entered, and for a moment her sharp eyes softened. "He's awake," she said, "but it's bad." Noah didn't respond. He followed her down a short hallway into a quiet recovery room. The dog, still unnamed publicly, though in Noah's head he'd long been Scout, lay on a thick bed of blankets, one side carefully wrapped in gauze and tape. A tube fed clear fluids into his front leg. His breathing was shallow but steady. When Noah entered, the dog raised his head slightly, ears flicking. Their eyes met. Noah dropped to his knees beside the bed, hand trembling as he stroked the side of the shepherd's neck. "You held on," he whispered. The dog blinked slowly, then rested his head on Noah's thigh. Noah's chest heaved. The tears came hard and fast, sudden, hot, unwanted. He buried his face into the shepherd's fur and sobbed, silent and shaking, the way a man does when he's lost too much and isn't as terrified to lose one more. It was the first time he'd cried since Rex died. The first time he'd let himself feel the weight of what he'd been carrying. Meanwhile, in a cramped second-floor apartment above Clay Ridge's closed-down hardware store, Marie Halden sat cross-legged on a couch, editing footage. The video of Troy kicking the dog wasn't just damning, it was devastating. It captured everything. The smugness on Troy's face, the sound of the dog's yelp, Noah's raw fury, the sheriff stepping in, the silence of the crowd. She added subtitles, adjusted brightness, and uploaded it to a secure drive. Then she posted it under a pseudonymous account she'd used for sensitive whistleblower reports in the past. The caption was simple: "This is Clay Ridge. This is what power does to the voiceless." The video hit 20,000 views in 4 hours. By morning, it was on 3 regional news pages and had crossed over to a major Reddit animal rights thread. By midday, the hashtag #Justice4Scout was trending on Twitter. Messages poured into Marie's inbox. Some were supportive. Some offered help. Some wanted interviews with Noah, which she didn't respond to. And then came the text. No number, just a line of cold words. "If you don't shut your mouth, there won't be anyone left to save your daughter." Marie froze. Her blood iced over. Her hand moved instinctively to the small photo taped to her laptop. Her daughter, Lily, age 6, grinning wide in front of a swing set. Lily lived with Marie's ex-husband 2 towns over. Safe, she thought. She hadn't told anyone in Clay Ridge she had a child. She stared at the screen for nearly a minute before slowly closing the laptop. Then she reached for her phone and called the only person she trusted enough to warn. "Hey, it's Marie. You're going to need to watch your back. And maybe Your front, too. She paused. And Noah? He's already in the crosshairs. At the vet's clinic, Noah sat with Scout for nearly an hour before standing. He turned to Dr. Merrill, who stood quietly by the doorway. Will he make it? Ava nodded. If infection doesn't set in, yes, he's a fighter. But Kane, that dog was targeted. That wasn't random. I know. She studied him. What are you going to do? Noah looked down at the shepherd, resting but alert, eyes still locked onto his. I'm going to find out who tried to bury him, and why they're so afraid of a dog coming back from the dead. The Clay Ridge Town Hall stood like a stone heart in the center of town. Gray, brick, iron-framed windows, and a brass bell above the doors that hadn't rung in years. On most days, it was just another aging municipal building. But today, it was a stage. Snow still clung to the curbs outside, gray and crusted, kicked aside by the boots of townsfolk filing in. Old men with coffee in gloved hands, young mothers holding toddlers in quilted coats, teenagers whispering behind knit scarves. There hadn't been a public hearing this packed since the timber mill fire 10 years ago. But this was different. This wasn't about zoning codes or parking lines. This was about a dog. Inside the main chamber, fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead. Foldable chairs were packed wall to wall, and every seat was filled. At the front, a low table held a microphone, a pitcher of water, and a name placard that read, Officer Noah Kane, suspended. Behind it, on a raised bench, sat the town's 5-member Civil Review Committee, all retired local officials now repurposed into guardians of order. To their left sat Sheriff Carl Hewitt, arms crossed, face unreadable beneath his thick gray mustache. To their right, a leather chair remained conspicuously empty, marked for Troy Maddox, who had yet to arrive. Noah entered through the side, wearing a plain, dark coat and no badge. He looked cleaner than he felt. His face was calm, but the set of his shoulders spoke of strain. Beside him, on a short leash, walked the German shepherd, ribs still wrapped in gauze, one leg stiff but upright. Gasps rippled across the crowd. Some clapped, some winced. The dog held his head high, not proud, but determined. His gaze didn't wander. He moved like he had somewhere to be, and no intention of letting pain change that. Noah led him to the table, paused, and looked out across the rows of faces. Then he sat, gently patting the dog's side. The shepherd sank to the floor beside his boots. From the back of the room, Marie Halden raised her phone, already recording. She'd dressed in dark denim and a black coat, her hair tied back tight, face pale from long nights. On the seat beside her rested a leather messenger bag. Inside it was something Clayridge hadn't seen in a long time. Proof. She had no intention of being silent today. The chair beside the Civil Review Committee creaked as Troy finally arrived, flanked by 2 of his usual yes men, Harvey Denton, the real estate investor with a beer gut and a permanent tan, and Bethany Marlowe, owner of the local radio station, known for her syrupy voice and razor-edged gossip. Troy wore another cream-colored suit, eyes gleaming, as if today's hearing was just another dinner party. He smiled at the crowd like he'd personally delivered each one of them from hardship. "Thank you for coming," he said to the room before even sitting. "Let's bring clarity to what's been so wildly misrepresented." Noah didn't respond. He simply sat. Committee chairwoman Margaret Ellison, a silver-haired former judge with a spine like iron, banged the gavel once. "This is a disciplinary review, not a circus. Mr. Maddox, please take your seat." The room quieted. Papers shuffled. Water glasses clinked. Margaret nodded toward Noah. "Officer Kane, This panel is here to review the events of the Winter Lights Festival. You may make your statement." Noah stood slowly. He didn't look at the committee. He looked at the people. "They say a man's judged by how he treats someone who can't fight back," he began, voice low but firm. "I was trained to de-escalate, to stay calm, to think. And I did, until I saw a man in power kick an injured animal because he thought no one would stop him." He paused. "They can kick a dog because it won't fight back, but I'm not a dog, and I will." There was a murmur from the room. At his feet, the German shepherd stirred. Slowly, agonizingly, he rose to a sitting position. His ribs protested, his leg trembled, but he sat tall, ears perked, eyes scanning the crowd. For a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Troy's smirk faltered. Noah glanced down. Even when he was broken, he stood. "I learned something from that." Marie lowered her phone. Now, she stood. "I have something to submit," she called out. Margaret's gavel banged again. "This is a closed hearing to community officials." Marie didn't blink. "Then make it open, because everyone needs to see this." She stepped forward, past rows of shocked faces, and laid a printed email on the table in front of the panel. "It's a message from Troy Maddox to Mayor Renshaw," she said clearly, "discussing suppressing records from the Clay Ridge Animal Shelter, including the removal of camera logs the same night this dog disappeared. The same dog Troy called disposed of." Gasps. Someone dropped a cup. Troy stood abruptly. "This is a smear campaign." Marie turned to the crowd. "You wanted clarity? There it is." Margaret reviewed the paper quickly. Then she lifted her eyes to Troy. "Is this your email?" Troy didn't answer. "I repeat," she said. "Is this your message?" Troy's mouth worked. "It's been taken out of context." The shepherd let out a low, tired growl. Not loud, but loud enough. The room split. Some whispered praise. Others shook their heads, confused. The tension fractured the air like glass under heat. The town wasn't unified anymore. There were sides now, and eyes that had once looked past the powerful had started to narrow in scrutiny. Noah sat. He didn't need to say more. The dog had already spoken louder than any man ever could. The snow had returned, harder this time, sweeping across the hills like a curtain of white blades. Clay Ridge, from a distance, looked peaceful. Rooflines buried in powder, pine trees crowned in frost, the mountain ranges dark behind veils of flurries. But beneath the blanket of winter something darker stirred. Noah Kane's pickup cut through the storm along Ash Ridge Road, headlights slicing across the falling snow. Marie sat in the passenger seat, her arms folded tight over her coat, her face pale in the glow of the dashboard. In the back seat, curled and silent, lay the German shepherd. Scout's breathing was audible now, raspy, too shallow for comfort, but he hadn't let out a sound since the hearing. He still refused to lie down, even with gauze wrapping his ribs and a compression pad strapped across his side. "You didn't have to come with me," Noah said quietly, not taking his eyes off the road. Marie shook her head. "Someone threatened my daughter. Troy had eyes on me for weeks. We're past the point of separate battles." Noah glanced at her then, really looked. There was something new in her gaze, more than fear, a grimness. Resolve hardened by knowing too much. They were headed to Noah's cabin, taking the long way around the outskirts of town. His usual road had been mysteriously closed off by a fallen tree. No warning, no alert from Public Works. Something about that had put Noah's instincts on edge. The town had been quiet all day. Too quiet. He had just reached the bend near Sable Pines, a desolate stretch flanked by bare woods, when the truck's engine sputtered once, then died. "Don't like that," Noah muttered, twisting the key. The dashboard flickered, then went dark. The snow outside thickened. Marie leaned forward. "We're not out of gas, are we? We've got half a tank." Noah opened the door slowly and stepped out. The cold slapped him immediately. He popped the hood and leaned in, but before he could check the lines, he heard the crunch of boots in snow behind them. He turned. 3 silhouettes emerged from the tree line. No headlights, no words. The first raised something shiny. Steel glinted in the snowlight. "Noah!" Marie shouted from the cab, but the shepherd moved faster. With a hoarse snarl, Scout launched from the open back door and hurled himself into the snow, straight at the man with the blade. The two collided with a thud. The knife slashed wildly and caught Scout along the side of his neck. Noah drew his pistol, fired once, missed. The second attacker lunged forward. Noah pivoted, shot again. This time, the man dropped, clutching his leg with a shout. Marie ducked behind the truck, reaching instinctively into her coat for the pepper spray she kept from her years reporting overseas. The third man circled wide, coming for her. Scout, now bleeding heavily, turned and launched again, intercepting him just before the swing of a pipe reached her head. Blood sprayed across the snow. Noah's third shot rang out, clean. The second man crumpled. The third staggered back and ran. Only silence remained. Silence and the hiss of breath from Scout, who now lay in the snow, blood blooming red against white. Noah dropped to his knees. No. No, no, no. He pressed his hands over the gash along Scout's shoulder and throat, trying to stem the bleeding. Marie's voice was trembling. "He saved my life." Noah looked up, his eyes wild. "He saved both of ours." Scout blinked once, weakly, and exhaled. A few yards away, headlights broke the tree line. A black sedan, its engine muted, rolled up like a phantom. Noah raised his gun, but the door opened fast, and a young man in uniform stepped out. Officer Ian Davis, mid-20s, narrow-shouldered, nervous eyes, stood in the snow with his hands raised. He was pale beneath his regulation parka, his badge half-hung. His brown hair stuck to his forehead, and he looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. "Noah," he said, breathlessly, "you have to come with me. Right now." Noah squinted. "What are you doing out here?" "I was watching the comms. Heard something was going down. I've got a place, your mother's old property, out past Iron Hollow. The house is abandoned, but it's safe. You'll freeze out here." Noah hesitated. "You're with them." Davis swallowed hard. "I was. Not anymore." Marie stepped up beside him, clutching a blanket around herself. "We don't have time." Noah looked down at Scout, who was barely conscious, his breathing wet. He made a decision. "Help me get him in the car." They loaded Scout into Davis's back seat. Blood soaked into the upholstery. Noah climbed in beside the dog, pressing pressure to the wound as Davis peeled out onto the frozen trail. As the trees whipped past them in the blizzard, Davis spoke, his voice hoarse. "I never wanted to be part of it. I didn't know what I was getting into when I joined this department. Maddox owns half of Clay Ridge, and he owns Sheriff Hewitt. They brought me in after Rex died. Told me it was a freak accident." Noah looked up sharply. "What do you know about Rex?" Davis gripped the wheel. "He didn't die in a drug bust gone wrong. He was executed." "What?" "Troy didn't want a K-9 on patrol with your clearance. Said Rex was getting too close. You were supposed to go that day too, but your radio glitched. You remember that?" Noah's stomach turned. Davis continued, shame in his voice. They made it look like a bad call, but it was ordered. Hewitt covered it up. Marie said nothing. Her fists clenched. The sedan pulled up to the edge of a dark, rotting farmhouse. Noah hadn't seen the place in years. His mother's old house, long since abandoned. Shutters creaked in the wind and snow whipped past the splintered porch. They carried Scout inside, laying him on the old sofa, now covered in dust but still solid. He whimpered once, just once, and then lay still. Morning came gray and slow over the crumbling farmhouse, light bleeding through cracked shutters like a secret not quite ready to be spoken. Snow still clung to the fields, crusted over after the night's cold. Inside, the air was thick with stillness. No one had slept much. Scout lay curled on the dusty couch, wrapped in every old blanket they could find. A thin line of blood had dried beneath the new bandages on his shoulder. His eyes were half-lidded, but alert, watching as always. Marie sat at the old wooden table in the kitchen, her laptop open in front of her, fingers flying across the keys. She hadn't changed clothes, hadn't touched the coffee Noah had brewed 3 hours ago. Her eyes were sharp behind her glasses, and the furrow between her brows deepened with every line she read. Noah stood leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her with the quiet focus of a man trained to read more than words. His face was unshaven, lined with exhaustion, but his eyes hadn't left Scout in hours. Davis sat near the fire, silent, his hands clenched between his knees like a kid waiting for judgment. Marie's voice finally broke the silence. "I found it." Noah stepped forward. "Found what?" She turned the screen toward him. It showed a grainy scanned document, a military report with faded headers and redacted lines. United States K-9 Operations, classified Tier 3. Subject, Echo, GSD, DOB 06-17-2017. Handler, Sergeant Matthew Cole. Status, KIA. Operation Dustlight. August 13, 2021. Cause, building collapsed during pursuit. Body unrecovered. Presumed dead. Noah stared at the screen. Echo. Marie nodded. Scout's original name. Echo was part of an undercover military K-9 crossover unit. They were loaned to local law enforcement for joint ops. That's how he ended up in Clay Ridge. Davis stood slowly. That date. That's the same day as the bust that killed Rex. Noah's jaw tightened. You said Rex wasn't supposed to die. He wasn't, Davis said, voice low. But you were. Rex got between you and the shooter. There was no backup. The suspect vanished. They closed the file fast, too fast. Marie clicked again. Another page loaded. A requisition form marked Clay Ridge Police, temporary K-9 assist request. Handler, Sergeant Matthew Cole, deceased. K-9. Echo, presumed KIA. No return order filed. No official record of reassignment. No euthanasia certificate. No microchip closure. He just disappeared, Marie said. And now he's here. Noah sat slowly beside the couch, placing a hand on Scout's back. You were there, he whispered. You saw it. Scout shifted his head to rest on Noah's boot, warm eyes locking with his. Marie exhaled. Someone wiped him off the system, my guess? Maddox. Operation Dustlight wasn't a real DEA job. It was a setup. Your unit got too close to something. Echo and Rex were liabilities. They tried to kill them both. But Echo survived, Noah murmured. And someone, maybe Cole, set him loose before it was too late. Davis moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutter. That explains why Maddox freaked when he saw the dog. He thought he was dead. No witnesses. No proof. Marie closed the laptop. Well, now he's more than proof. He's a symbol. Noah glanced up. What do you mean? Marie opened her phone and turned it toward them. The screen displayed a video. Scout limping across the town hall floor, head high, standing before a room full of people. A child's voice narrated softly. The dog that never gave up. It had over 1.3 million views. Articles had begun circulating. Blog headlines, local news blurbs, posts from animal rescue pages. One tweet read, "Scout the miracle canine, back from the dead, standing against cruelty. Hashtag justice for Echo." Marie tapped on a photo. That's from the 2019 gas station explosion in Oklahoma. Scout, Echo, pulled a little girl from the rubble before emergency teams arrived. His name was buried with the story, but he was there. Same scars, same face. Davis whistled under his breath. Jesus. Noah leaned back, one hand stroking behind Scout's ears. He survived more than any of us. Marie looked at him. He's not just a dog anymore, Noah. He's the name they tried to erase, and now the whole world's watching. Outside, the wind stirred the pine trees again. But inside that broken farmhouse, something else was rising. Not just truth, but fire. The hall inside Clay Ridge's city courthouse hadn't been this crowded in decades. Rows of wooden benches overflowed with residents, reporters, local high schoolers in jackets too thin for the weather. News vans parked shoulder to shoulder outside, lenses peeking through frost-streaked windows. Warm breath fogged up the tall, arched windows. But inside, the tension didn't thaw. On a makeshift stage at the front, beneath the banner Clay Ridge Community Accountability Hearing, stood Noah Kane. For the first time in weeks, he wore his uniform, creased but clean. The patch of the Clay Ridge Police Department stitched tight to his left shoulder. The badge wasn't back on his chest yet, but the weight of what he was about to say felt heavier. Beside him, on a short leash, stood Scout, or, as the world now knew him, Echo. The German Shepherd's bandaged leg had been splinted in a soft brace, his ribs still wrapped. But his stance was firm, his eyes alert. He wore a new navy blue canine vest that read across the side, Echo, Guardian Unit. Noah stepped forward and looked out over the crowd. He took a breath. "You've heard the stories," he said, voice steady. "About the man I confronted. About the dog who wouldn't stay down. You've seen the footage, read the rumors. But today I want to speak without edits, without filters, just truth." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. "I served my country," Noah continued. "Then I came home to serve this town. I lost a canine partner, Rex, not to fate, but to corruption. A setup, a lie buried under official reports. And the dog standing next to me, he was meant to be buried too. Discarded because he saw what he wasn't supposed to. But he survived. And somehow, that survival scared the people in power more than any weapon." At the back of the room, Marie Halden stood holding her phone, camera already rolling. She wore a black coat over a navy blouse, glasses resting low on her nose, her hair pinned up. Her face was composed, but her eyes followed every word like they were code. Suddenly, the double doors of the chamber burst open. Troy Maddox strode in, flanked by Sheriff Carl Hewitt and two bodyguards dressed more like nightclub bouncers than peace officers. Troy wore a charcoal gray wool coat over his usual tailored suit. His salt and pepper hair had been freshly trimmed. His stride was bold, smug, confident. "This farce ends now," he said, voice ringing out. "I demand a right to respond." Chairwoman Margaret Ellison, seated behind the bench, narrowed her eyes. Her silver hair was pulled back into a bun so tight it seemed to lift her brow. "Mr. Maddox, you are not on the schedule. Please take a seat." "I don't need to be scheduled," Troy sneered. "This is a witch hunt, a smear campaign built around a mutt and a disgraced officer with a grudge." Murmurs surged in the room. Noah didn't flinch. Marie, without a word, reached into her satchel and pulled out a small black recorder. She walked forward and set it on the podium in front of the council. "Then, let's hear it from someone who used to stand beside you." She pressed play. The voice crackled to life, unmistakably male, gravelly with nervous breath. "Maddox said if we didn't move the bodies out of the warehouse before the dog sniffed them, we'd have a bigger mess than Rex. Said it didn't matter who got caught in the crossfire, as long as nothing led back to him." A collective gasp filled the room. Troy's expression froze. The smugness drained from his face in real time. The voice continued. "He was the one who signed off on the fake K9 termination file. Said the shepherd was too recognizable. Dump it in the hills, he said. Let nature clean the evidence." Hewitt looked down, as if wishing to disappear into his own badge. Chairwoman Ellison banged the gavel. "Officers, remove Mr. Maddox from the chamber." The bodyguards hesitated, but the courtroom stood. A man in flannel pushed forward. A teenage girl held up a homemade sign. "Echo is truth." Another woman clutched a news clipping of the 2019 explosion Scout had once responded to. The crowd surged, not in violence but in unity. Troy tried to retreat, but this time there were no doors left to open. Two state troopers, already briefed and waiting by the rear, stepped forward and cuffed him quietly. Echo growled low, just once, and Noah placed a calm hand on his back. The silence that followed was thunderous. A week later, the badge returned. Noah Kane stood in the front office of Clay Ridge PD, his hair neatly trimmed, his uniform pressed. Across from him, Chief Wallace Mays smiled thinly and extended the silver shield. "I can't take back the time you lost," Mays said, "but I can give you this." Noah nodded, "Only if he gets one too." At his feet, Echo sat upright, tail thumping once. Mays chuckled and turned to an assistant who brought over a velvet box. Inside lay a smaller, custom K9 service badge. It read, "Echo, Unit 0471. Guardian of Clay Ridge." Marie's story went live the same day. The dog who made a town listen stretched across the online front page of the Clay Ridge Echo, now revived and receiving more traffic than it had in 20 years. The piece told everything about Echo's survival, about Rex, about Noah's return, about the night of the ambush and the truth hidden under the floorboards of the town's soul. The story was syndicated, picked up across the state, then national. Marie's inbox flooded with emails. Veterans, officers, survivors, children. She replied to every one. And then she closed her laptop, looked down at the framed photo of her daughter and whispered, "We did it." That evening, just before sunset, Noah took Echo for a slow walk through the snow-covered field behind the precinct. His limp was still there, but steadier now. He wore his vest with pride. With every step, townsfolk waved from porches. Kids pointed. One even saluted. At the edge of the field stood a simple new memorial post. In honor of K9 Rex, a protector, fallen in silence. In honor of K9 Echo, a guardian who refused to die. Noah crouched beside the marker and looked at Echo. "We speak now," he said. Echo blinked, ears flicking forward, and licked his hand. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faintest echo of applause, from a town that had once turned its back, and from now on never would again. Echo wasn't just a dog rescued from a wire cage and blood-stained steel. He became something more. An echo of what was lost. A guardian of what was right. In the quiet streets of Clay Ridge, he reminded people that silence can be broken. The truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. Children who once walked past the police station with fear now paused to wave. A lonely veteran left flowers at Rex's memorial. A mother who once feared her voice meant nothing shared Marie's article with the caption, "We listen now." In a world so used to scrolling past pain, one dog made people stop and feel. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs a little light. Leave a comment below to let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you never miss stories like this again. And tonight, may God bless you, your home, and every soul still waiting to be heard. Echo would want that.